Hi there, I'm Stan Baker, one of the hosts of Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. You know, superintendents and directors play a critical role in easing the stress in schools for principals and vice principals. Take a restorative approach to those principals meetings, for example, by reflecting on the questions asked, and try giving time in the meeting for peer-to-peer conversations. Be intentional about checking in and asking principals what's happening for you. Use the same trauma-informed restorative practices for the adult leader in the building that is used for students. It's important that this support be intentional. At the end of this episode, be sure to visit our website, www.restorative.ca, where you can find some free restorative resources. And if you enjoy this, make sure you subscribe on YouTube. Now, the conversation is already underway with Shelley, Steve, and me, Stan. We're talking about easing teacher stress, and really what we want to continue the conversation about is how can superintendents and directors actually ease stress for their direct reports. And we talked a little bit about meetings. Let's talk about how some simple restorative suggestions for how you can ease stress just in, say, like a principals meeting.
Having attended hundreds of principals meetings over the years, it's interesting as we're leaders and we all realize what bothers us at staff meetings when teachers aren't paying attention or they don't show up or they're late or they want to leave early and all that stuff. And yet we get together as principals, we do the exact same thing, which means that our needs are probably the same. And so as a superintendent who calls their principals together in a meeting, and maybe a half a day once a month where they all meet in a large room or wherever. During COVID, it was all online, but face-to-face meetings had value. Giving principals and board leadership, because it wasn't just principals, it was vice principals and consultants, we all met together, giving those people just the time to talk and needing to listen to them as well. We're always given these tasks, and the agenda is very rigid, as we're always told. This is an ambitious and rigid agenda. We might not get it all done, and we never did. We're 5 minutes into a half-hour discussion, and we're already talking about all the problems we're having with this teacher and that teacher, and back at my school, and somebody else is saying, I'm having the same problem. We always just evolve into, helping each other to get through the next week or two or three with some of the issues we're facing in our own schools. Because with principals and vice principals, who have you got in your own building that you can go to? You don't have anybody. If you're a principal and you have a vice principal, lucky, there's two of you can meet at the end of the day. But for a lot of single administrators, there's nobody in their building that they can go to and say, geez, I'm having a really bad day. I want to talk about it. You can't talk to your secretary, your staff. It's not appropriate sometimes. These meetings are important, and I think superintendents need to realize that principals need that same time, or leadership needs that same time, just to get together and have some conversation about some of the struggles and some of the stressors that are happening, not the least of which sometimes is getting together these half-day meetings when everything else is happening back at the school and I really got to be back there. It's very complex, it's not easy, but board leadership needs to recognize that at every level there is stress, and at every level those people need a chance to get some support from their colleagues, and it could be all the superintendents getting together too.
One of the areas that I really saw as a glaring area of need when I was working in the schools for administrators was the trauma-informed approach. Administrators were meant to lead a school. They're meant to have it all figured out, have it ready to go at all times, no matter what was happening. And they were often forgotten about anybody checking in on how they were doing. And then you get the odd superintendent that would recognize that, and that would be their style. And the appreciation that I saw from those administrators, that somebody came and said during a tragic event, what can I do? Do you need me to answer the phone? Do you need me to run that message? What do you need me to do? And then the follow-up days later, not just in the moment, but it is a real gap for administrators around support. And it doesn't have to be a tragic event. It could be a very public thing with a parent going on. It could, whatever it is, but that is a real gap, that they're supposed to always know how to manage these things and be okay with it at the end of it. So that's really an area I think that leadership can support leadership, is just checking in on them and saying, is there something you need?
And recognizing whether it's a traumatically open or traumatically closed system. Like a traumatically closed system, everybody's shutting down and working at things, trying to work things through internally. But a traumatically open system is one where there's everything is just blown wide open and there's no filters, there's no control of information going up and down the authority structure. And what you really want is an appropriate level of information that's flowing back and forth. And just that simple check-in. This is something leaders can do to check in, like, how are things going for you? Not how are things going for the school, but how are things going for you? Because nobody's checking in with the principal to ask them, okay, so you had a fire in your building last Friday and you've gone through a whole bunch of stuff. How are you doing?
Yeah,
How's
it's
this
just
for you?
expected to be part of the job. Now, I do
Right.
see administrators will check in with each other if they're friends or they already have that informal support network, and that is great. The message needs to come from the next level up that I care about how you're doing right now.
I don't think it's good enough to just leave it informally. I think you need to be much more
Mhm.
intentional about this. Like it has to be something where there are lots of times where people don't have an informal network. Thankfully,
Right.
most of the principals that I work with, but there are some that work in isolation and they're very remote schools. And so there isn't any kind of support network. So it's really up to the leader, the superintendent of a district to actually say, so when we get together, what are the things that we need to talk about, or to check back in with how the individual is doing? Because this is what we're saying is important for students. It's also because here's what's going to happen. We're going to lose principals at a faster rate than we already are. Principals are leaving because of the stress. Teachers are not stepping up into principal positions because they look at what's happening to their principal and they're thinking, holy smokes, I don't need that. Just give me my classroom. I can close the door. There's enough stress there. I don't need all this other stuff too. So if you want to keep the principals, you got to do something a bit more intentional, I think.
And I reflect back on a lot of the superintendents that I had over the years, and some of them, they're very busy too. We have to recognize that they're being pulled in a million different ways too. But they would intentionally book certain days where they visited schools, and nothing got in their way about that. If they had some parent who was angry, wanted to speak to them, that's fine. They'd still come to your school, and they may have to step out to take a call, but they weren't sitting in their office waiting for that parent to call. They knew that they'd eventually get that call, whatever school they were at. And so they intentionally went around to every school. And sometimes they'd come in and you totally forgot they were coming. And all of a sudden you get this call, hey, the superintendent's in your office. He's waiting for you. Oh, what did I do wrong? And realizing they're just dropping in to see how everything's going. And they would take the time to sit down and say, let's talk about what's going on. Tell me how things are going. What's challenging you right now? And I had lots of times where my name would be in the local paper. And invariably I got a call not too long after that or a long email saying, saw what's going on, let me know if there's anything I need to do. Or in one case, articles were written all about what a terrible job I was doing with bullying at a school. And I responded to some of the accusations of things that were happening. And I got a long email from my superintendent saying, read the article, don't agree with any of it. I think you're doing a great job. And I agree with everything you said about what's happening at your school. Don't worry. And you know what? After you've had a crappy day and you've got all these parents saying, what's happening with my kids at your school? To get that support from your superintendent, it's just an email. And then he came in like how many days afterwards and said, what's going on? What can we do? And so knowing that person is there to support you and behind you and is recognizing that they've taken time out of their day, which is incredibly busy, to just fire off an email, that's incredibly valuable in terms of a leader. When you talk about young teachers not wanting to go into the profession, Stan, there are some that are wanting to go in the profession, but the average age of principals is getting less and less starting off. And then years of experience. When you got principals stepping into the role, leading a school of 5, 6, 700 kids, and they've been a teacher for 5 years and they've been a vice principal for 6 months, and now you're running a school, like a year of skills. When I got into it, I was told you're going to probably be a vice principal for in 3 different schools, probably 2 years per school, so 6 to 8 years, and then we'll talk about whether you move up to be a principal. Now, if you can fast track to be a principal 5 years at a teacher's college because no one else wants it. apart from the scarcity, when you are getting people, they don't have the skills. They're coming in brand new and they're learning on the job, but everybody expects them to have the skills. And there's where the stress is. People expect you to be perfect. You're just not able to do it because you don't know. You've never run into half these issues.
Leadership in schools is stressful. Principals and vice principals need the intentional support of directors and superintendents. The how-to starts with a trauma-informed restorative approach to the adult leaders in schools. For example, set up principal meetings for conversations in small circles. Another suggestion, check in on what's happening for each school leader. Find out more about our work at www.restorative.ca. Email me, stan@restorative.ca. Check in regularly about the impact of stress on principals. Our leaders need intentional support, just like everyone else.